Hey, whole Bible readers, it is now week 12, and with this week we begin the book of Samuel. Why did I call it the book of Samuel and not just 1st Samuel? Well, in fact, 1st and 2nd Samuel are originally one book. They were divided in two to make it easier to handle the scrolls, because one scroll of the whole book of Samuel, especially when the Bible was translated into Greek, got to be kind of big, so we split it into two volumes. But it's a singular story. It's a story that focuses on the period following the Judges. In the Hebrew Bible, this book, in the list of books, follows the book of Judges. Now, in our English Bibles, the book of Ruth is in there in between, which gives us some of the backstory of David, and this book gives us, well, more of the backstory of David, if you will. Just a fun fact for you as you're beginning this book. One of my bestest friends, we've been colleagues a long time at both of the places where I taught college and where he did as well. He's an Old Testament specialist and an archaeologist. And I said to him one time, Mark, how did you ever get into this thing? What hooked you? And he said, to be honest, I was a kid about 9 years old, and I was in church and I was bored. So I picked up a Bible and I started reading 1 Samuel, and I was hooked because the story is just so ripping. There's so much intrigue and so forth. So if you like, stories about palace intrigue and so forth, you're going to be drawn into this, but drawn into it maybe differently than you are with other epics or TV miniseries or thrillers or something of that nature. So this book is the story of Samuel and then Saul and then David. And by the way, when I'm recording this, there's been lots of social media buzz about David, and I think your reading of these books is going to be helpful in kind of tempering that. Okay, so, well, what's up with Samuel? Hannah is his mother, and her story is about God's exaltation of the humble and bringing down the proud, because she's a childless woman who's experiencing shame because of that, and she's actually articulating the hope that Israel has of a coming king as she is extolling what God does for her in sending her son. Well, Samuel grows to become a member of the priesthood, but also a judge, the last of the judges, we remember them from the book of Judges, but also a prophet. Now, we haven't really talked about prophets since Moses, because the main office of prophet in the Old Testament exists there to challenge the kings. And so as kings are going to be introduced, so we'll see the rise of the prophets. In Samuel's time, the Philistines are the major threat to Israel, and they were a big threat because they had mastered the craft of smelting iron. So they had iron weapons, which just gave them enormous military superiority. The people of Israel are going to use the Ark of the Covenant as kind of a good luck charm, take it into battle. The Philistines are going to capture it as they defeat the Israelites, but then they're going to realize that the Ark brings on them a curse, and God is actually going to fight for Israel, even though Israel doesn't deserve it, in a way that you don't expect. Eventually, the ark comes back to Israel. Well, the Israelites want a king, not just somebody to establish order. No. Ancient kings are primarily military leaders. We need a strong man to lead us in battle. And Saul looks like a strong man. He's tall. He's got broad shoulders. He's got a thick head of hair, narrow waist, big muscles, okay? And so initially he's effective, but he has weaknesses of character. He's seduced by power. He likes attention, and that ultimately weakens him. Well, he then is challenged when Samuel is sent out to anoint another king secretly, and he goes to this obscure place, to this obscure family, and anoints the least likely person there, the middle school kid, David. He's nothing, but he has an audacious faith in God. Meantime, Saul is cursed with a bad spirit. This is not a demonic possession. This is a way of saying he becomes sad, he becomes angry, he becomes depressed, he becomes a little paranoid and suspicious. Well, David's trust in God is affirmed as he defeats Goliath, and then he becomes a rival to Saul because he's so popular, and so Saul seeks to kill him. And much of the rest of the book of 1 Samuel is going to be about David fleeing Saul. Now, we see David's character when David has multiple opportunities to kill Saul, but he doesn't. He turns those down. But read carefully, because also we'll see where on occasion David does some things regarding women which are questionable. This guy's husband dies, and he takes his widow as another wife, and things of this nature. And that sexual proclivity is going to provide his own downfall in 2 Samuel. It's very interesting that a lot of the Psalms that we have been reading are attributed to the period when David is fleeing from Saul, when he's just calling on God in absolute trust. Now, the Psalms we'll be reading this week are just typical of the Psalter. They're words of praise, words of dependence, words of hope. They don't literally, in the way that some of the other Psalms do, reflect those situations of David, but they reflect the larger kind of life situations in which we find ourselves. So what are we learning here? Know your flaws and trust in God. It's only as we know our flaws that we can develop a truly godly character and that we can learn to trust in God and not in ourselves. All right, y'all. Happy reading.